Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to Building Site episode 22. Today is a bit of a special episode because we're going to talk about the World Wide Web. It's 30 years today since Tim Berners-Lee posted an announcement of the World Wide Web on the alt.hypertext newsgroup. And so this is 6th of August 1991 is kind of the anniversary of when the web started, when it was announced, when Tim Berners-Lee started bringing in contributors and appealed for people to help with the project. So it seems quite a suitable date to announce the same with the site, which is our project in Juxt, to try to reset and recalibrate the web to the original vision of the web. So here to discuss this is Jeremy Taylor, who's head of product, working at Juxt on our Crux product, and just wanted to talk about some of the design principles around site and what we're trying to do, and why we feel in part of this history of the web, and why we feel that the original vision of the web is something that we hold dear and something that we want to take forward in our work in site. So anyway, this episode is really not going to be too much coding. We've been coding quite a lot in the last few episodes, and so we're going to take a bit of a break, and we might have Stephen Dearbold join us a bit later, where he's, I think, busy driving through parts of Canada to get to his cabin, so we'll see if he arrives. But anyway, and we're going to lose Jeremy for quite soon, because Jeremy has to go for you have to go for a medical appointment, don't you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I've got the vaccine.
The second jab.
Second bit. Yeah.
So after this episode, you'll be fully jabbed up, ready to go.
Yeah, good arm again, hopefully.
Yeah, and it's a Friday, and I've got a beer, and we're chewing the cud. So hopefully you enjoy this, and we'll release this episode as a podcast as well. So if you're watching on video, we will be, we'll also release it as a podcast. So anyway, one of the things I wanted to talk to you, Jeremy, about was really the kind of the history of the web, and what did you when you think of the World Wide Web, what do you value out of the web? You grew up with it, right? I mean, it was something that it must have been something that was just a thing throughout your whole life.
Well, it's funny you say that. I think of people in my generation in this country, I was probably quite a laggard actually in getting access to the web. Well, maybe certainly compared to the guys at Juxt and anyone else in programming. I think the reason for that is just dial-up was so expensive, and my father was well, he still is quite tight. So if I wanted to,
hopefully he's not watching.
It would have to be on the school computers or something. So I didn't really I wouldn't say I grew up with the web. I think when I got broadband at home, that was my that was when I really realised how significant it was. Before then, I was a bit naive, or I didn't grok the sort of social element. The idea that you could create your own website. No one had explained that to me. So it seemed like it was just a slightly more advanced version of Encarta or something up until that point. So when I look at this, and even this alt.hypertext newsgroup, I'm guessing that's an NTP thing, right? They were a precursor to the web. Before the web, like ever since the beginning of the internet, there was things that felt a bit like the web. The web just made it visual and had such a good layering of standards. I guess it's overtaken everything else.
Yeah, I remember when the web came out and it being quite a dramatic change. I remember the Netscape browser. I think that's really what it really took off because of Netscape and the animation. And it was a really cool product. But the fact, even over a dial-up network, and I remember that was the thing I think I saw at work, and it was what drove me to get a dial-up connection at home. It's about 94, 95. There were lots of other people on bulletin boards, online, modems. I'd not really got into that. Although I did have the internet at university. I went to the University of Warwick, and we had email and news groups, and before you had any spam and NNTP, and it just worked perfectly. It was just a wonderful environment, you know, a computing environment there. I remember leaving university, going to my first job, where there were PCs and some of them were networked, but most of them weren't. If you wanted to print something out at college, you would just sort of LPR, and magically it would just go to a laser printer, and you would go down and pay, I think it was 18p a page, and get a beautifully typeset report out, and you would, you know, hand that in. When I went into work, PCs were, you know, if you want to print something out, you might have a laser printer, but there was this LaserJet, HP LaserJet 3 on a trolley, and we used to go up and down the lift, and you'd have to go and try and find who else had the laser printer, and it was, you know, wheel the trolley to your station, get the parallel cable with huge grate, plug it into your PC, print the stuff out, and then somebody else would be kind of forming a queue by your desk because they would want to use the printer as well. They were expensive. And then that first year we were just beginning to network. So the idea of being able to be on a network at home over dial-up and go to websites where you could see text. We did have a bit of the internet, I guess, or at University of Warwick, but it was more, I guess it was a bit of chat, downloading. It wasn't like surfing. It was more, you might be able to download a file if you knew where it was, and you might have to piece it together with UUD code or something. You had to like kind of maybe on the news group, you had to download it, every individual if you wanted to get, well, I'd say PDF, but PDF didn't exist if you want to get. And Gopher, I think I remember seeing Gopher, but anyway, it was a really remarkable change, seeing that you'd dial up on the modem, you'd go to you'd launch Netscape, and I think I kind of got a PC at that time, installed Windows 95, because I think at that point, I mean, Linux was around, but it wasn't something that, you know, how would you know about it and how would you download it? And so my first experience of the web, I think, was a kind of early version of Windows 95 beta, or no, in fact it was Windows 3.1. Anyway, long time ago. Yeah. But it was startling because you could click on links, and it's my first exposure to hypertext and how easy it was to navigate information. The kind of thing that we take for granted now with, you know, being able to click around and learn things. It's truly incredible.
Whilst you're talking, I was thinking that I had grown up with computers. Like, we'd always had lots of computers in the house, but they were never networked. So I'd never experienced, you know, being sat on a computer at my end and then thinking, other things are happening. You know, like the world is mutating around me. You know, I could have a conversation like that. Was never something I really realised. Probably until 2000, when I had access to school computers, and we used like Ask Jeeves or something, and then the teacher was like, "No, you should use this thing called Google. You know, it's the future." Sadly, he was right. But yeah, I think there's something in the fact of like jumping around in an ad hoc way, which defines the web. And like, my experience of that early Googling was like, oh, I can go and access information. But given like Encarta was on a CD and it seemed to have most of the things you needed for your school homework research, like you may as well just navigate Encarta. And Encarta was very well structured and felt like Wikipedia. So why would you want to go and research that same information on web pages that are downloading very slowly? So that was my, I guess, first impression of the web, was like, oh, it's a slow way of accessing the same information, which is a bit noisier than you'd otherwise get. And I don't think really even just the point of the internet took off until it became a social phenomenon in my life, at least. Like, instant messaging and that sort of thing. That was the big thing. I guess in the business world, it would have been email. That was the same sort of realization. But obviously the web being a visual phenomenon is really key component.
I think you make a really good point, because you have to remember at the time, and you mentioned Encarta, that we were still very enamored by CDs that could contain 640 megabytes of data. And you have to remember that the floppy disk at the time, the double-sided floppy disk, would be 1.4 megabytes. So CDs are just you know, they obviously came out in the 80s, but you'd have CD drives in a computer, and so you could access in 640 megabytes. I mean, that's still a colossal amount of information. If you think even today, I think, I don't know what Wikipedia is, but you know, 40 gigabytes or something of, you know, so you could pack into 640 megabytes a huge amount, and that felt like all the information you would ever need. You'd never be able to consume that kind of amount. So that felt enough. But you touched upon the what made the web different was that you could become part of that network. You could publish stuff. You could be part of that web. You could never be part of a CD. You could never install your own content onto a Laserdisc. That was always a one-way process between Microsoft, the publisher, and you as the consumer. So I think that that was a very important aspect of it. And the read-write ability. I've read that Tim Berners-Lee's first browser supported the ability to write HTML or write documents. HTML came a bit later, but writing documents to a website, and the put verb as well as the get verb, or at least the post verb. That was, well, I mean, HTTP came a bit later than the web, but the ability to write things, FTP upload, that was part of the browser experience. And obviously that makes sense, because when you don't have a web, when you don't have any content, you want to optimize the ability for people to write content. And so it's the most natural thing in the world to create a browser that writes. But very soon, I remember Netscape 4 had some ability had a very nice HTML editor, but quite soon, I think after IE4 dominated. So IE4 was the first Microsoft browser that really began to take over as I think it was free, but it began to take over Netscape, and that's when you really start seeing Netscape begin to dwindle. Netscape at that point was a paid-for browser. You used to buy browsers and had to go into your local computer shop and buy a package and hand over money for a browser, which would come on a CD. So I think that and IE4 didn't have that ability to write to the web, and I think that was, for me, that's the beginning of where the social element of the web, or the early social element of the web, which was very important, dwindled, and it got restored when Microsoft did have some products, front page, and the ability for people to create their own websites, which was established, and people did things on the early web like GeoCities, and later on MySpace, where people could begin to publish their own content and have an identity, have their own website, which has since come back in the form of Facebook. But the two important points about Facebook, you would say that people who upload Facebook documents, it's not the same thing at all. Firstly, because the information is owned legally by Facebook, and it's a walled garden. But secondly, because you have very, very little control of what you can put up and what style from the color, the palette, you don't get much of a chance to express yourself on these platforms, nor do you have any sort of sense of originality, and more increasingly today, those platforms are quite heavily censored, and you don't have the freedom to say what you might want to say. So the diversity of the web certainly was began to be kind of reduced.
Did you have a MySpace profile then, Malcolm?
I didn't. No, I didn't have any. I didn't have anything to say that was original enough to put on a MySpace page. I did. I mean, I did have my own website. I think I did have. Early on, I did put up some websites. I had an early website. I got an early domain, and called congroove.com, and I put stuff on there. But yeah, it was fun. But it's because I knew how to FTP HTML, but for it wasn't easy. You had to kind of rent space on a box somewhere. You couldn't just create something in DigitalOcean. So a few of us got together and we rented a box in a data center somewhere, and we ran email on there and had, I guess, a few megabytes of space each. And so I did that for a few years.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, MySpace was probably my first experience of editing HTML in a public way, like, you know, so that people could see it. And I think that's the same for a lot of people. Like, we used to spend just hours and hours and hours tweaking, you know, marquee banners flying across the screen and the CSS colors, and you could do some phenomenal stuff. And MySpace was a bit of a jungle, really. But it also felt like a website in a way that Facebook just doesn't. Facebook feels like a feed and some forms where you upload photos and stuff. Whereas MySpace was, you could virtually create pages. People would create new accounts, which weren't real accounts. They would be like, you know, project sites basically. So like Facebook, yes, you can set up a page, but it's not the same. So MySpace was this really like dynamic environment. Yeah, so we've definitely lost something by not having like a social media platform that is more web friendly. Because I guess, yeah, the ability to write HTML directly is arguably a really key capability.
Yeah, MySpace was very liberal in what it allowed, and you know, incredibly. And I think you can still sort of see a gradual decay of your of the freedom to express, or the control that you have over what you publish, going from the freedom of FTPing anything up to your website to kind of MySpace, which was the fact that MySpace data did sit on MySpace servers. That was that was and then latterly where now it's very much owned by social media giants and controlled, and all, even to the extent of all the copyright, I guess, of everything you produce, so when you upload to these social media platforms, is surrendered. But I think this is important, because I would like to think that site is a latter day MySpace, so that one day it will be easy enough of. Firstly, the principle of self-hosting is important, even though you may, for convenience, rent some space off a server, which is very easy to do, or some service or some company that will host it for you. That it should feel like as easy as FTP, except for not the pain of having to rent an FTP server and keep it up to date. That should be done for you. But yeah, I feel it would be nice to recreate that sense of autonomy and self-expression that MySpace really delivered.
So is that one of our goals for site then, is to make it very easily self-hostable? Like you could sort of spin up a Heroku.
Yeah, I would like to think that the sense that we're open and free, open source and free in the free as in speech, not just as in beer, aspect of it, then always allows people to do what they like with it, and a community member to be free to take the code, and long after we've finished programming it, it can have a life of its own, and you can only do that with an open and free product, and so that goes hand in hand. But I would like to think that is an important principle, and the principle of the right, being able to write and read, self-host. I think those are very important freedoms. So yeah, we touched upon that. I think if we go back to looking at the web from a different perspective, I think obviously the web wasn't from a collaboration point of view, the web unleashed. The web was really designed to allow people to access information. It was designed to allow researchers in CERN to access the information they were publishing, but in order to collaborate on high energy particle physics. But when you have access to information, it's really a means to an end. You know, the point of accessing information isn't just to educate yourself. It's not just a read-only experience. The point about it is that you consume information in order to build upon it. There's no point in building a new, you know, parser generator technology unless you can understand what is the current state of the art, what is the current understanding, what's the current scientific established
frontier.
Yeah, frontier. What is the frontier? And then push it forward. And so information sharing has always been a critical part of progress. But it's not enough to just share, not enough to just consume information. You have to be able to build upon that information and create a new frontier. And that is a continual process. So for me, the collaborative nature of the web, not just read and write, but the ability to share thoughts, to communicate, to publish, to annotate, to comment, to discuss, to criticize, is all fundamentally part of an information system. And yeah.
I was going to say there's like the original vision was almost, I don't know, but I haven't read Tim Berners-Lee's like personal vision for it, but I mean clearly he was in a scientific context. It was all about scientific publishing, so papers, results, data. But yeah, the web obviously now is like an application platform and mostly around communication or like business workflows or something like that, or social media. So those things are all being served by the same stack. But clearly there's a reason why, like in the science communities, like notebooks, these digital notebooks are being pushed, like because they make the science even easier to share and collaborate in a way that clearly the web is almost too raw. So the web is like a good abstraction to build lots of things, but it's not really the optimal like raw format for doing information sharing or communication. Because whilst it has read-write semantics, the abstractions it gives you aren't useful enough on their own, and I wonder whether that's something the web needs to resolve, or I mean, the web isn't finished and it has other problems with the way it's distributed and relies on DNS and that sort of thing. Yeah.
You mentioned notebooks there, and I know we're running a bit short of time, but let me know if you have to go, Jeremy, and we'll
yeah, it will be in a couple of minutes.
Yeah. I wanted to touch upon notebooks because I feel notebooks are, you know, they were part of any scientist's toolbox. I mean, for many mathematicians or physicists or naturalists or biologists would all have notebooks. You know, when a scientist died, you'd go and find a library full of their notebooks and handwritten. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks were probably the most famous example of this, and you know, for many years, science has been his personal notebooks have been very important, and I feel that there's been a real renaissance or resurgence of notebooks in the form of you know, like Rome Research and Evernote before that, and capturing notes and personal notes and getting things done tools, and Moleskine notebooks, and I think that they are you know, one criticism of that is that it's just doing it on a computer. It's doing the individual personal collecting of individual research, and I think I've always taken the view that human organizations are better than individuals, in that the real stuff of humanity, the real progress that we've created isn't developed by individuals, even though the individuals are the ones that are celebrated by historians mostly, but real things happen when humans get together. We are ultimately social creatures. You know, the characteristics of humanity are that we get together in tribes and we get things done together. Even from the point of hunting for food, we would do it together, and therefore I think there's a lack of emphasis on collaboration tools, and that it's not enough to just create notebooks that allow people to collate their own personal graphs of information, but actually the real progress, or the real exciting force of progress comes from when humans can collaborate on these information networks and creating information networks. And so I really feel that you need to be able to tick two boxes. You need to make an information tool feel as it's like your notebook. It needs to feel as friction-free, as something that you can just very, very easily access, read and write, and yet at the same time something that makes sharing and collaborating and working together with colleagues and reviewing and discussing completely frictionless and seamless. And therefore we need to sort of break down the barriers between, what is, your information island and my information island, and make that make that a common space. And it's okay to have a private space, but it's better to take tools that are optimized for collaboration and create a private version of that than the other way around, which takes something like Roam Research, which is optimized for private research, and bolt on the ability to share, and so for me, site has always been about the word site, of people coming together to a single physical place, a single point to share and discuss, to confer. So I feel that is an important principle of site, that it's truly collaborative, and it's collaboration first, with all the read-write elements that requires.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess there's different levels of that, because it's still like a singular instance, so the collaboration requires like a central server, but that's not necessarily a problem. And clearly some monumentally huge things in the world are doing good value and being productive, even though they're centralized, and I think that model has a long way to go. But we have talked briefly before about like Solid or those sorts of things, where they emphasize federated identity and that sort of thing. Is that something you think you would like site to become ultimately, or is that?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason we're building on a central server is just because it's an easier problem than building on a federated set of nodes. But ultimately, data sovereignty is very important to us. I mean, we can't. We've been talking at length about the way the world and the web has turned out, that people's data has been disenfranchised. People have been disenfranchised from their data, not just from a consumer point of view. People have got photos uploaded and owned by Facebook and been legally divorced from owning data. But we have whole companies that don't. They may own the data, but the data is not. They don't have proximity to the data. The data is scattered to the four winds. It's over in hundreds of different SaaS products. Very, very difficult to integrate your own data. And integration of data is key if you're going to collaborate. We talked about the silos that are created between individuals if we all have our own notebooks, but we also have silos between different activities that a company does. An organization will have accounts, they'll have financial records, they'll have legal documents, they'll have contracts, they'll have customer records, they'll have employees, they'll have HR processes. And to keep all of those records in different places means that you lose any advantage of integrating those information sets together, which creates huge friction in moving forward and owning your own data. So data ownership is absolutely fundamental. When you must own your data, you must have your data centralized where you can access it. You must have the freedom to integrate it into the same place. You must have the freedom to protect privacy, so that prying eyes outside your organization can't steal it or can't access it, so that you're free to collaborate with your peers, and you need proximity access. You do need that data close at hand. You can't do joins. You can't, if you want to join your data, it's no good if you've got to hire hundreds of programmers to integrate between hundreds of different SaaS products. So we really have thought about this and how the web, the current state of data ownership is we need to turn upside down. It's a huge obstacle to progress that individual companies bring together tiny subsets of data, silos of data, and they lock it down behind proprietary protocols and APIs. So yeah, I think that's the data sovereignty is important, but it's a prerequisite to integration of data, and integration of data is really a prerequisite to making the most of information. To see new insights, to be able to join and bring data together is a prerequisite to get to insights. And insights are a prerequisite to making progress. So it's all one chain, a tower of dependencies.
Well, that last one you said, the progress, that reminded me there's a symmetry like in the relationship between my personal information and like the company information, and how they sort of feed off of each other, and you want ideally one system to bridge across both, so that my personal information, whilst I want to be able to keep it private, that the stuff that I want to push to the wider company can be very frictionless. Similarly, like from a workflow perspective, and actually processing that information and producing new information, actioning things. The more integrated that system is, the more efficient everything is, because there can be less process. Like there doesn't have to be as much process at both ends to then have like a synchronization. What I'm saying is that it's not just about like static information and learning. It's also about workflow and integration over time of information, which is. Yeah, I mean, I guess it always comes back to, we shouldn't really be building separate systems. That any time we can be using the same system, we'll have an advantage. And I guess that's what the web ultimately has been, is a lot of people using the same system to have.
That's a very good point. I would put it in a different way, that we know the complexity that arises when you copy information, when you start having to update multiple copies or maintain multiple copies of the same information. Every programmer knows the dangers of repeating yourself. We have a mantra: don't repeat yourself. If you have information in various places in a program, then you get discrepancies and you get bugs. But there is an entire industry segment which is devoted for copying information from one place to another, not moving it. Just hundreds of we call it integration or middleware or information. And it's a vast area of activity which makes everything much more complex. And the one thing that I think the web really got right was that, arguably got right, that that it allowed you to put up a piece of information authoritatively at a website, and that people would go to your website and they would get that piece of information, and you could update it. People could cache that information. That's a bit different from copying it. When you cache something, you know that you know that it's a copy, and you know that you should check back. You know at least who the original owner is. We live in IT. It's very rare that you know who the authority of a piece of information is. It's just a value in a spreadsheet or a record.
Data lineage system to help you with that.
But the web, we don't talk about data lineage. We just go to that website. If you want to know the weather today, just go there and it will tell you.
I'll need to go now, Mark. I'm sorry, but that is a very good point about copying. So if we get this right, then people can stop copying information.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much for your time, Jeremy, and good luck with your COVID jab. I hope you don't get any nasty side effects, and I'm sure you won't.
Sure, it'll be fine. All right, have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend. Thanks very much. Bye now. Goodbye, everybody.